Morning YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. It's Sunday morning, the 4th of August, Father's Day in Australia. I'm just getting ready to start recording Outsiders and First Dog on the Moon.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. And we thought we'd take advantage of the fact that it's the Melbourne Writers Festival to bring writers into our Outsiders group this morning. Sam Crosby joins you. He's Executive Director of the McKell Institute and author of The Trust Deficit. And Stephen Amsterdam is with you as well. He's a palliative care nurse, but a novelist also, author of the Age Book of the Year winner, Things We Didn't See Coming. What the Family Needed, a new novel, The Easy Way Out. Maxine Beneva Clark is author of The Hate Race and Foreign Soil. Welcome, all of you. G'day, thanks for There's Sam in Sydney, Stephen and Maxine is still in Melbourne, and the circuit continues. You two off to Brisbane. Correct. Books in hand.
Yes, indeed.
That's right. Dear me. See, this is the life of a successful Australian author. I had a weird thing this week. The death of Gene Wilder, of course, legend of comic acting, and then, well, they started talking about Blazing Saddles. And that's one of the few bits of Blazing Saddles, thank you, that we can still play you in 2016, I suspect. Maxine, the weird news this week that people are intending a re-release of Blazing Saddles, which has all sorts of trigger warning words in it, shall we say. That's which raised in me, given the current conversation in this country about the Race Discrimination Act, and the number of times people in support of what they want to do to that will talk about PC gone mad, and I'm sure they would all defend the re-release of Blazing Saddles. But why shouldn't we watch it in 2016? Explain to us.
I think, Blazing Saddles is a product of its time. It was in early to mid-70s when we think about, 6-7 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated, the height of the civil rights era. I think that argument is kind of, do we really want to hold up something that essentially was, seen as revolutionary in that era as something that
a film that was avowedly anti-racist, and yet did it in terms that today we would consider to be racist in themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's a sign of times changed. And I'm all for contextualizing. If is going to be shown, why not show it with a panel discussing, its context in the history of cinema, in the history of anti-racist film, as opposed to just kind of re-releasing it and promoting it, holding it up as something that is still can be consumed the same way today.
It's weird, isn't it, Sam, that we sort of are winding the clock back in a way with this conversation around the Race Discrimination Act and 18C, and this constant heckle from the right in this country in particular about how PC is just having the better of us.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, you've got to think to yourself, where in the litany of problems that this country is beset by, where is it that we need to be just that little bit more racist to each other? How important really is that next to, funding of healthcare or your earlier panel talking about Aboriginal deaths in custody? Where on that list does our need to be just that little bit more racist fit in? Where is that, Steve?
We need that freedom.
Well, but that's exactly the argument. I mean, the proponents say that nothing is more important than my freedom to be, bigoted or whatever else I want to be.
I always think that the term politically correct is a right-wing talking point. And so just using, if you just replace correct with sensitive.
Polite,
yeah, politically polite, alert to the needs of others, then you don't have as much of a problem.
Do you watch a lot of politics?
I'm a little more tuned into the American stuff.
How vastly entertaining that must be for you.
Yeah, it's a bit more, it's the home team, and it's such a nasty cage fight, and it's depressing, but it's interesting to watch it in going over the same material, but with still more polite here, quite honestly.
Maxine, would you agree? Polite here. I mean, you're a
Relative.
fairly
Relative.
you're a political person, and you prosecute a certain sort of politics through your work as a writer.
Yeah, look, I would say that, politeness is not, necessarily a politician's stock in trade here. But, I do think that there, American politics, there is a certain language to it that maybe has not quite occurred here. But, we're trying to get there with the whole 18C thing, aren't we?
Well, a wonderful thing in American politics is that overnight, I think, Stephen.
What's the end of that
well,
sentence?
Donald Trump in a black church in Brooklyn being given a Jewish prayer shawl.
To an empty audience.
Yeah, kind of thing. It was like anyone from the alt-right, don't look at this image because your head will explode. Sam, you're chuckling quietly. I can hear you.
Oh, I mean, come on. The Trump phenomenon is there's lots to laugh at there, right? There's lots to laugh at.
And here's really what's they don't talk about trigger warnings as much here as they do in the States, but that concept sort of feeds into the narrative of a political correctness that must be stopped. And if you look at Trump, and we look at Trump and think he must be stopped or he's not polite, and then think of the trigger warnings and other things we're supposed to be sensitive about as too far, too touchy, and too coddled, then we're simply saying that my politics are the best.
That trigger warning thing, Maxine, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about that, and a lot of I mean, the political correctness thing, but it's an avoidance of certain conversations. We don't want to go there, and people would argue we forbid that conversation. I mean, is that a healthy approach, or should we thrash the thing out? Should we actually?
Well, I mean, I think it's worth thrashing out, and isn't that what, freedom of speech is, the thrashing out of ideas? And I think in the case of trigger warnings, it's really just a flag to say if you don't want to read about this particular topic for any particular reason. And it's about really protecting those that would potentially be traumatized by hearing about or reading about that thing.
And yet there's that, I mean, it can go too far. It can be more than a flag. It can be a prohibition as well, which is, maybe that's a necessary overcorrection, but is that helpful? Is it, it is better to have the conversation, surely.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, I don't think I would ever see a trigger warning as a prohibition. I think I would always just see it as a statement of possibility that you may possibly be offended by this. And I really don't think there are many people who would avoid a certain topic. It just means that they know they're going to be encountering it in advance. For example, the screening of, something like The Birth of a Nation or whatever, whatever it may be, the Gene Wilder film. I've got kids. If I'm up on a Saturday night, I want there to be something that flashes up on the screen that says, you might want to turn off your television.
Yeah, I mean, let's. I hate quoting Jackie Lambie in just about any context, but in the case of 18,
We know it's been your secret desire.
I think she had it absolutely right. If you've got a lawyer that can't find an exemption for you under the current legislation to say what you want to say, you've got a pretty crappy lawyer. There are exemptions so wide you could drive trucks through it. Basically, if you believe it to be true, you can say it. It's only when you
That's
willfully
Section
go out.
18D. It covers all contingencies.
Exactly. It's laughable, this idea that we're all cowering around, unable to freely express our opinions, and if we do, we have to have trigger warnings. Come on.
Outsiders here on Sunday Extra, Sam Crosby, Stephen Amsterdam, and Maxine Beneva Clark. Now, this was a weird thing that happened on Thursday, local time.
Mr Turnbull lost complete control of the Parliament, the first time in 50 years that a majority government cannot win a vote on the floor of Parliament.
Everybody, Stephen Amsterdam, was extremely excited about the opposition winning some votes in the Australian Parliament. How did that strike you?
It did anything happen? I mean, it seems to me like it was point scoring without a net effect.
It was like that famous Spike Milligan joke that suddenly nothing happened. Mind you, it happened suddenly.
No, I'm sure it was exciting to people who understand all the procedural implications and the historical implications, but for someone who say wants the banking commission to actually happen.
Sam, were you excited?
It was point scoring, but the game's sort of in its first quarter. This is sort of first blood, if you like, has gone to the Labor
Jumper
Party.
punching going on.
That's
there.
right. In the first 3 days, for a government to lose control of the House and not actually be able to shut a debate down, that's pretty incredible, really.
Where does that, Maxine, that sort of formal politics coincide with your sort of experience of political reality? I mean, is it a meaningful
I
expression?
think as a layperson, as an outsider, it just seems farcical. It's just that kind of we proved a point that perhaps we can we proved a point that we can cause chaos, that the House is not under control. Which is amusing as someone who's not immersed in politics. But as Stephen said, ultimately,
And yet,
what happened?
tens of thousands of words have now been written about that since Thursday. There's been no end of analysis.
But that's what's happened, for the last week. But this is what the Labor Party learned so beautifully from Tony Abbott. For the last week, and probably for the next couple of days, we're going to be talking about how Malcolm Turnbull doesn't have control. That narrative sort of fits beautifully into what the Labor Party wants to be talking about.
I guess what I'm wondering is whether there is that narrative in formal politics, but whether they actually coincide with people's lived experience is kind of a question I have, whether it means anything really.
No, sure, and it certainly contributes to an absolute loss of trust in our institutions and in our politicians. Absolutely, it does.
Which
Sure
might be
sense
the
that-
overall goal.
The loss of trust. Oh, okay. They're actually trying to bring down the system from within. We've rumbled to the true Labor strategy. Maxine, what do you think? I mean, it does formal politics, parliamentary politics, the whole is Malcolm Turnbull steering the debate kind of conversation. I mean, where does that actually hit reality? How does that actually, coincide with life?
It doesn't. I mean, I feel like, the election happened. That itself was incredibly farcical. We know that, that the government is got in by a very slim margin. And it just, you're right, it continues that narrative of, here we go again. Maybe things aren't under control. Maybe we elected the wrong person. But as far as a grassroots level, the person on the street doesn't care. They just want the government to get on with
Well, it
things.
probably pushes the person on the street away further.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never mind the punitive victory to one side or the other. I mean, it's the general impression of that actually cuts through.
And especially if it is such a slim margin, so why not actually govern from the middle and actually compromise? I mean, that's become such a dirty word in the States now, and it's becoming just as evil here.
Well, the States are such a good example right now of conciliatory centre politics, don't you think, Stephen? I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah. I mean, arguably, Clinton is getting it from both sides because she's the most moderate person running at the moment. And so, but instead of doing all this point scoring from one side to the other, why not say, actually, the people who've elected us have elected as moderately as they could. If you look at the aggregate,
that would appear to be the collective wisdom of the event.
But instead, one side has to win.
Sam, I mean, the thing that amazed me was that 8 weeks after an election, we have what, 3 sitting days of Parliament, and they go away again for another week. I mean, really?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, politicians do actually work extremely hard when Parliament's not sitting. It's a bit of a cheap shot to say, politicians
tell
only
us
work
about
when-"
that.
Well, they're constantly at street stalls. They're going to every single function, evenings, mornings, afternoons that they can possibly get around to. If you're a shadow minister or a minister, you're either travelling to some godforsaken part of the country to, talk to other people that, But I mean, the point earlier that Stephen was talking about that I think we need to consider in terms of why they can't just reach out and reach across the aisle and sit down and work with, because Malcolm Turnbull doesn't have control of his own show. Earlier this week we saw a frankly incredible revelation that Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull took a policy of negative gearing reform to their expenditure review committee, a subcommittee of cabinet that determines if it goes to the full cabinet, and got rolled. Couldn't get it through. They wanted to do a policy, not the same as Labor's, but along similar lines to similar ends.
Okay, that's the upload limit. Back soon with a new movie.